overall summary of the
Right, yeah, you can't tell how many are on the web, unfortunately. Yeah, I can tell you that unfortunately nobody's logged into Facebook, which is okay. But yeah, there's no way to tell.
I was just thinking, I have a point that half of the people in any audience are going to be affected by dementia. So that I was going to say, like, if we knew that there are 800 people watching, that's 400 people that are going to be.
Oh, then you could use that as a comment, yeah, but it'd be too hard to tell.
Don't worry, don't worry.
Yeah.
Thank you, though.
Sure.
Actually, I wouldn't want a water bottle. Would you like a water bottle?
Every Sunday, bring them to church. I go to church.
Don't mind. Oh gosh. It's just,
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for for coming to our Journey with Alzheimer's event this morning. My name is Katie Shepard, and I'm the outgoing Director of Advancement and Stewardship at Christ the King. And so on behalf of Father John and our Christ the King community, I welcome you to Heman Hall. We've done this, a variation of a program like this for 3 or 4 years in a row now, and it just keeps growing. And I anticipate we'll do it again next year. So please be on the lookout for it about this time next year. We do have some more food coming, so sit tight. And there's more coffee. There's plenty of coffee in the kitchen. But we're so excited to put out the just important, valuable information that you're going to hear about today. And please ask questions. I was told that these presentations are meant to be a dialogue, not a lecture at all. Before we begin, I just want to just thank Ron Borkowski. He came to me last year when we were planning an event like this, and he said, if you need any help, if you need any support from Sanders Brown Center on Aging, I can get that for you. And I thought, Ron, where have you been all my life? And so between Ron and Susan Neville from Silver Lexington and all of the contacts that she has, somehow we've all kind of landed at Christ the King and have been able to open this up to all of our faith communities and all of our communities in general. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ron Borkowski, who's going to introduce the speakers, and Bishop John. But please feel free to get up throughout and get what little food there is left. There is more coming, and just enjoy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Well, you're about to see a miracle. You remember in the Bible there was 2 fishes and 7 loaves? Well, now you're going to see how God worked all this. He went to Kroger. Again, my name is Ron Borkowski. I am a member of this parish since 1995. Before we get started, I talked to the bishop several times about Alzheimer's and my story with Carol, which I will tell you in just a few minutes. But before we get started, what I'd like to do is to start off with Bishop Stowe and some comments. He is in San Diego at meetings. Otherwise, he said, I would very much like to be here. So with that, Bishop Stowe.
Hello to a gathering of good friends, and welcome to this special Pathway to a Cure for Alzheimer's Disease event. Today, you will hear from the Director of the Clinical Core from the Sanders Brown Center on Aging, Dr. Gregory Jaika, as he highlights current trends in research towards an answer to the debilitating effects of dementia. Dr. Jaika is joined by Alexandra Hunter, a clinical research associate also from the Aging Center, who will give a brief introduction to clinical trials that are currently ongoing. In addition, Susan Neville, the owner of Silver Lexington, will present on practical living options for families caring for elderly family members. We are all aware of the lasting toll on families that a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, or indeed any related dementia, can have. The Cathedral of Christ the King holds a regular support group for those journeying through life, caring for a loved one with dementia, and we welcome anyone to join us as we share our lived experience in the spirit of fellowship. We hope you find today's program informative, useful, and of comfort. Comfort that knowing here in Lexington, the faculty and staff from the Sanders Brown Center on Aging are working hard to provide answers, treatments, and above all, support. I know how difficult and challenging it can be when a loved one faces Alzheimer's or any form of dementia. My own dad had bouts of dementia as he battled with Parkinson's. I know the toll it takes on family and loved ones and how important support is. I'm glad that you're here today for this event, and hopefully you will spread the word about the good things that are going on in Alzheimer's research and the support that is available to you. God bless you.
I'm here today mostly because Katie, who we talked a year ago about Alzheimer's and what the parish was doing, and I said, well, I can relate to that because Carol had Alzheimer's for 10 years. In November of 2011, my and my family, our lives changed. I took Carol into Sanders Brown, and they confirmed that Carol had Alzheimer's. I couldn't even spell Alzheimer's. I had no clue what it was, but my immediate reaction is, all right, what do we do to get her healthy? You know, what medicine, what does it take? You know, let's get this done and over with and get on with life. With Alzheimer's, as I found, you don't get on with life. Basically, being told that Carol, in the point, and for the 10 years, the first 5 was good. I see one of her bowling partners is here, and Carol bowled with her for those years. And we made a decision because Alzheimer's itself, I really didn't know what it was. And as we proceeded with our lives, we decided to be open about Carol's illness and to tell our other friends and that Carol has Alzheimer's. If she says something or repeats it and all that, please excuse her because that's the disease she has and we're dealing with. That was a very good decision on our part, and we got a lot of support from that. And there wasn't a person who didn't put their arms around Carol and adopt her. And for the first 5 years, we could go out socially, things along that line, and things were okay. Dr. Chaika warned me there may be a change in her personality. And in that 6th year, that happened. And one time, Carol called me on a Monday. She was continuing to bowl and said, I'm going to Georgetown to visit a friend of mine, and I'll be a couple hours late. And 4.5 hours later, they triangled her, and we found Carol on the other side of Ashland, Kentucky. That's probably the first time that I readily admitted that there is a problem, a big problem with Alzheimer's, and understood everything going on. I understood when my son said, Dad, Mom sent 3 birthday cards, and instead of admonishing her, that I learned to say, Carol, Nick got his birthday card. That her world, she was in herself, and she became, after going through a violent period that lasted 2 years, came back to the normal Carol that we knew, except it was her world and not ours. And everything that she said at that time, it was true. I mean, you just accept it because it's her world, not our world. In talking with Katie, when I saw that in the bulletin about Alzheimer's meeting, I thought, you know, the experience that my family has gone through, which was hard, very hard, and I wanted to see what we could do to help others to go through reliving their life, because a lot of people do not understand Alzheimer's, especially if you don't know anything about it. And then how can we educate the people to know what Alzheimer's is? And then secondly, how do we go about helping the caregiver? Because it's the caregiver that suffers the most through this whole process. And in so doing, that became a help and kind of a goal to see, all right, let's have these meetings. Let's tell people what it is. Let's show them what is available. This is why we're having this meeting. I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is Dr. Jaika has been quarantined this whole past year. He even went down to Wild Health this morning to confirm and to see if he could come here, and he's still under quarantine and will be. Good news is we have Dr. Peter Nelson. Dr. Nelson and I met one time when he put a brain in my hand and said, "This is what's in your head." And I said, "Well, lots of luck, because that's a pretty good sized brain." And after I pass and he tries to find my brain to see if that can help in any research in any form. But Dr. Nelson is one of, his exact title is, he's the Director of Neuropathology and is the Associate Director of Sanders Brown. Pete is a wealth of knowledge, but above all is one of the leading scientists in trying to discover a cure for Alzheimer's. When I passed, or when Carol passed, Dr. Jaika called me and he was crying. He said, "I'm sorry we let you down." And I said, "You didn't let us down." I said, "You gave us hope." And that's still what we're dealing with today, because basically this has been going on since 1986 when they really started to study this. Without further ado, Dr. Peter Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Ron Borkowski, who is one of the most amazing people that I know and I have had the pleasure to meet. Yes, my name is Pete Nelson. I work at Sanders Brown here at the University of Kentucky. And one of the things that I'm not going to talk too much about myself, but one thing I do know is that people around here generally like to hear a little bit about you, how long you've been here, what motivates you, what your guiding principles. Like we just heard from Ron, that he's been from 93, he was in this church, that 95. Since 95, that he is motivated by Carol, and that his guiding principle is to help others, which he's done a lot, particularly caregivers. For me, it's a little bit different, but a lot the same. This is my grandmother, my mom's mom, who died with Alzheimer's disease. It was a very wrenching experience for my whole family. And then over the past 5 years since I got here, my father had symptoms of dementia and died with it last year. So this is something that is profoundly impactful. It's no coincidence that it affected both Ron and myself. It's not like some obscure thing that is going to only affect us, and that's why we're carrying the flag. This is something that is going to affect half of people. There's around 60 people in this room, so around 30 people here are people who we are fighting for to prevent you from getting dementia. That's what it's all about. And it's not going to be Al-Qaeda or China or Russia that's probably going to take us down. This is the thing that we're scared of. And when I say we're scared of, I'm not just saying it's not the political right or the political left. These are the things that we see about on the news. But when you ask people, adults, what they're afraid of, they say dementia and cancer. Sometimes cancer is a little bit higher, sometimes dementia is a little bit higher, but oftentimes dementia is higher. Because we're all afraid of dementia. We see that it's a harrowing experience. It's harrowing for my grandmother, harrowing for my father. And these are the motivations that help guide me and get me up in the morning. But then what are the guiding principles? And there are three that I wanted to fill you in on. The first is respecting the research volunteers and behave in a very ethical way in regard to how we do. I think that Ron will attest that this is something that fires us up. Alex also knows this very strongly. This really is a guiding principle for us. And so these three are in the order of how much they're aspirational. This one we can do, we do, and this is a mission accomplished, but it's something we work on every single day. Second is to be the best in the world. And I'm not going to bore you with statistics about academic benchmarks and all that stuff, but just suffice to say that we're not trying to be contributors. We're trying to be the best in the world right here at the University of Kentucky, and that's why I'm here, is that this was a place that people talk about in Tokyo, they talk about it in Berlin, they talk about it around the world. But a lot of people right here in Lexington don't know that they have a best in the world type of research facility like Sanders Brown. Final thing, which is the most aspirational, is to work on the team that defeats dementia. And that has been a frustration for people in my field. And Hilda, can you hear me? Okay. Hilda said that she's a little bit hard of hearing and she wants to have clarity, and she says pretty well. So let me know if I need to jack it up a little bit, okay, Hilda? I'll try to get that for you. But that really is the goal. That's what gets us up in the morning every day, and it's the last thing we think about. That's a common team. And it's an unusual thing, and it seems like I'm sort of a cheerleader, but I put my money where my mouth is. My whole family's here because this place has an extraordinary ethos of trying, and they give different ways of have a different way of ordering maybe, but I know that other people on the team have the same basic goals. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about dementia, which has a formal definition. It means that you have disorders in thinking and memory in various cognitive domains, but it's severe enough to affect your ability to perform activities of daily living. That's the definition of dementia. It's not a disease, it's a syndrome. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a little bit. But the characteristics are, you see here on the y-axis, for excellent nerdy people, the cognition. On the x-axis is the progression of time, cognition going down. Relentless progression. And certain cognitive capacities are affected in a different order of being there. So this is different from other things that affect your brain or your mind. For example, delirium is over here. This is delirium. So over time, if you have the flu, or if you have 4 or 5 good old Kentucky bourbons, you can be feeling great, but you're going to do a lot less good on your test, and I don't want you driving alongside me, but you'll come back. Whereas with dementia, there's this relentless progression. And in real life, it's very frequent to have the two things overlay on each other, so that you'll have this sort of downward slope with increases and decreases that happen periodically. So a basic question is, and I'm not going to get too much into nerd speak, but it is sort of an interesting point. We're talking about neurodegenerative diseases. These are the conditions that underlie this clinical syndrome of dementia. So the manifestations that you see is dementia. The underlying diseases are neurodegenerative diseases. What degenerates? Well, it's sort of, to comprehend that, you have to sort of think of what the brain is. The brain is a big system of 100 billion nerve cells. The nerve cells communicate to each other. And this is sort of a cartoon schematic to depict that. You've got neuron 1, it gets on the phone line, it talks to neuron number 2 at this place called a synapse, and it releases these chemicals called neurotransmitters. And that is the basic unit of what you see in trillions of these synapses that makes up your mind, thinking, memory, etc. Another player in this whole tragic deal, but also a big player in the miracle that is our brains, the incredible miracle that is our whole being and our ability to think and have a mind, are called proteins. Proteins, there are tens of thousands of different proteins, and there are billions of them in your brain, and they normally subserve the functions of structure and functional capacity in the brain. So that's what proteins do. There are thousands of them. But in dementia diseases, specific proteins get messed up. Specific proteins turn from exquisitely specific, active, excellent machines to full of glop. They become gloppy. They become very unsoluble in water, and it takes up your brain. So in dementia diseases, that impairs structure, that impairs function. And returning back to our cartoon, we have these neurons, these processes that connect the neurons and the synapse, and these gloppy proteins fill up the neurons, fill up these processes and destroy the synapses. So what occurs is these cells die. The cells die, the white blood cells that are so important in fighting off disease, instead of fighting off disease, they come and they cart away all this debris in your brain. So when you look at a brain, like Ron was talking about, you hold it in your hands, it's usually about 4 pounds. But after a dementia disorder, it's less than 3 pounds. So we're talking about destroying around a third of your brain, carting it away, and that atrophy is incompatible with normal function. So it's destructive. That also enables you to appreciate that there's a lot more hope in the stage of preventing this condition from starting than rewiring that infinitely complex machine once it's been a third of it destroyed and trucked off. Does that make sense? Any questions? This is, Katie said this is a conversation, not just a lecture, so I'm happy to, if anybody has impromptu questions, glad to take them.
Is it genetic?
There's a very strong genetic component to it. Something like if you have a first degree relative, mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter, who has it, gives you something like a 5-fold increase of risk. So it has a very strong genetic component, for sure. It affects around epidemiology, that's a long word that describes just a disease in a population. So in terms of in a population, around 2% of people at age 65 have dementia, but that number doubles every 5 years. So it's an exponential growth of risk, such that around half of people at age 90 have clinical dementia. You look like you're giving me a stinky face over there. It doesn't look good. No, it's not good. That's why we're here. So yes, very common, and I know that there are people from Indiana and Ohio and Florida that are on our live stream today, and I wish we could just say just the Indiana and Ohio ones get it, so that's the 50%. But unfortunately, no, we're all Americans, we're all human beings, and this is something that all of humanity is discouraging, and everybody has that 50% risk. But the people that have, yes ma'am?
Do any other countries have a higher rate than we do, or do we even know?
There are different types of diseases. So the diseases that affect, that are Alzheimer's disease per se, not so much, it's about the same. But there are other conditions that harm your brain. I'll talk a little bit about them. And those can have an environmental component that can be affected differently in different environments. So, but there's not like a big uptake of Alzheimer's per se in different countries. So this is a chart that describes how people in my field have failed to date. We have failed. The deaths, the percentage change as the population has gotten older, with Alzheimer's disease has gone up quite a bit. And even as the big key thing is heart disease and stroke we've gotten better at. So we're letting people live to an age where they're vulnerable to get Alzheimer's disease, and then that one has shot up.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is it more prevalent today than what it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago, or just we just know more about it because people are more open about it, or is it something about our lifestyle that's causing this?
So yes and yes and yes. So we are living to be older than we used to, and that puts us into an age frame that's at greater risk. We're able to deal with some of the other things, particularly things that affect the brain, like cardiovascular factors, and that enables us to live to a point where we get the Alzheimer's risk. We are better at and more aggressive with the diagnosis. Our clinicians have more of a clue than they used to. So all those things are true. And in fact, though, probably the people are healthier now in advanced age than they used to be. So the diagnosis is higher, but the health factor may be a little bit higher as well. But yes?
Are there any genetic markers if there's a familiar history, like have an uncle?
Great question. So the question is, if you do 23andMe, can you get told of something about your risk? And yes, you can be told about something fundamental about your risk, which is the biggest risk factor, which is called ApoE. It's a gene that confers 2 to 5 times higher risk of the disease. And so yes, you can get a simple test to know about your risk. There's a lot of ethical issues with what you do with that information, and whether or not when you think you want to have that information, you actually do want to have that information. And so I would advise people to consult with somebody about that rather than doing it just, hither and thither. But yes, the short answer is yes. There is genetic factors that are strongly linked to the risk. Yes? How do you die of Alzheimer's? It used to be that the natural history of dementia is a complicated question. A lot of people that have dementia recently have died with COVID, for example. The actual longevity of people in America has gone down 2 years in the past 2 years, as literally over 1 million people have died of the disease, and disproportionately many of them actually had cognitive impairment. But classically, the classic natural history is to sort of die in a nursing home in a fetal position. So you have inactivity, and you have impairment of your ability to clear the gook out of your lungs, and so you die with pneumonia. So classically, it was said that the people that were dying with pneumonia died with pneumonia. But now we say that person who died with pneumonia would never have died with pneumonia if it hadn't been for Alzheimer's disease. So it's just a swapping of the diagnostic category. But now people are much more likely to say somebody who died with advanced dementia died with Alzheimer's. But that's one of the ways that they actually end up passing away. Yes?
Dr. Nelson, if I'm not being too intrusive, you referenced your own father's death and say he died with symptoms of dementia. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yeah. Yes.
Could they have a lucid moment just a few hours before they die?
Yes. So people can have lucid moments, and I believe that gets to the question of when I showed you the cartoon of the different components of the neural circuit, where one neuron is talking to another. There's chemicals between them that enable that communication to occur. Those chemicals can surge in the brain, and they can enable a moment of lucidity despite the fact that a lot of the brain has been sort of trashed.
My husband, when he received the holy rites, he made the sign of the cross, and he was about to die, but he made the sign of the cross. So,
did y'all hear that her husband made the sign of the cross, even though he was incredibly impaired as he passed away? That's sort of as analogous, and so maybe some of the things are not stuff that are known to science, and maybe that can be in a different category, but it's analogous to maybe a computer who's degraded, but that gets sort of a power surge from the electricity at some point. Yes?
Is it higher between men or women, or they get it the same?
Women live longer, appreciably longer than men. So the average age of death for women is around 80, and the average age of death for men is about 75. It used to be higher, a couple years higher than that. But that puts women at a higher risk range. It's a controversy about, there's no doubt that women get Alzheimer's more than men. But there's a controversy about their innate risk of it. There's no doubt there's something like Parkinson's disease, which is a movement disorder, and the associated Lewy body diseases, and I'm talking sort of inside baseball, but these are highly man-centered. These are where the man risk is higher than the woman risk. Alzheimer's risk is higher in women, but teasing that out from the difference in longevity is actually deceptively challenging to do.
Thank you.
But, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you said it's hereditary.
Yes.
But if you had a parent who didn't really show any Alzheimer's till they were late 80s,
Right.
Are we still talking hereditary possibly, or could that just be because the person reached a higher age?
Well, it's increasingly clear. It used to be thought that there was a risk when you're 70, and then it goes up to a higher risk when you're 90, and that the risk at 90 was the same stuff that you had when you were 70, only more so. But it turns out that the people that affect you, the diseases that affect people that are 90, are different from those that affect people when they're 70. There's overlap, but there's also important distinction. Same thing with cancers. Different cancers affect different portions of the human aging spectrum. Different dementia subtype diseases affect different age ranges as well. So I would say that whereas the person who dies at age 90 with Alzheimer's has a different risk factor than somebody at 70 in terms of the relatives, they're at risk for the thing that killed their mom at 90. At 90. When they're 90, so they're more at risk for a late onset condition. It's not absolute, but I would just say that it is an important variable. Age is a very important variable in how these diseases manifest themselves. Yes?
The statistics and the studies you've been mentioning and giving us statistics on, were those strictly for Alzheimer's or are they for dementia in general?
So the dementia was at 2% to 50%. Alzheimer's disease is a subset of dementia. It's the most common one, but it's about 60% of dementia, give or take.
What's the youngest age you see with Alzheimer's?
You can have Alzheimer's in your 20s, but this is a very strong genetic Alzheimer's. Every single person with Down syndrome gets Alzheimer's because the triplication of the chromosome includes a gene that drives Alzheimer's super strong. So every 30, 40, 50-year-old Down person has Alzheimer's in the brain, and by the time they're in their 40s and 50s, they have dementia per se. So I've seen a brain of a 5-month-old child who had Down syndrome who passed of a cardiac condition, and they already had some Alzheimer's pathology. So it's not a aging-only condition. It's really a biological condition. And the good news is something like 20-something% of people will have no Alzheimer's at all in their brain, even though they're 190, whatever years old. So most people get it, some, but a lot of people have very mild Alzheimer's, and if that is true, then they have very mild, if any, conditions. But 20% of them have nothing for Alzheimer's. And so that is hope, that we can affect the environmental and genetic and medical factors necessary to treat people up. It's just a matter of equilibrium, just shift the equilibrium a little bit, because it takes so long to develop. Yes, ma'am.
This diagnosis commonly known as hardening of the arteries. Where does this fit into the spectrum?
Hardening of the arteries is a non-medical term that refers to vascular pathologies. It can be in big vessels, and it's called atherosclerosis, and it can be in little vessels called arteriolosclerosis. Both of them affect the brain adversely. And it gets to a point that I was thinking about making later, but I'll make that. If there's one thing that you can do, that you absolutely can do, that decreases your risk of dementia, it's actually two things. I'll tell you two. Take care of your blood pressure, take care of your blood sugar. Attend to hypertension, attend to diabetes. Those are super duper common, and they pound the heck out of your brain. You may or may not get Alzheimer's, but for a given amount of Alzheimer's, which many, many people are going to have, hypertension and diabetes worsens it very, very much, or treating them makes it better. That's something you can do. You can get on your phone with your doctor tomorrow, and you can decrease your risk for cognitive impairment very appreciably, very fast. Hypertension, killer. Diabetes, a killer. We know that they get your heart, but they get your brain too. It's not that fun to live with a stroked out brain. Yes?
Is there any relation to the way our food is being produced now with all the chemicals and stuff that we were consuming before?
So the question is, what's the association between the way that our food is prepared and the way that some of the cognitive changes happen? I think you can just say the stuff that your mom told you to do, eat right, exercise, those are good for your brain mental health and for your long-term acuity. I think that there's controversy about the environmental toxins, including some of the preservatives in food. But have those green veg like your mom said. Anything else? Yes, sorry about that.
Is there any connection between Alzheimer's or dementia and fatigue?
Fatigue. Well, it's tough to say because a lot of people are fatigued easily due to heart problems or many other factors. Or it can just be you have more fatigue as you grow older anyway. So I would say that it wouldn't be on my top 20 list of risk factors or sort of red flags, but it can be one of the correlates of cognitive impairment as well. But if you were feeling a lot of fatigue, I worry primarily about hearts and lungs. First, hearts and lungs. Yes?
As a woman of 80, married to somebody who's going to be 81, what are some of the symptoms that you may be getting Alzheimer's? I mean, we all have memory problems.
Right.
And I've heard of this twilight thing that happens, and I don't think you're worse in evening or something. Can you comment on some of those early symptoms?
So one of the obviously we all forget where our car is sometimes, we forget our keys, etc. And there are a number of stereotypical symptoms, including, and this is sort of outside of my bailiwick, I'm sort of a humble country neuropathologist in a lab rat. So, but in terms of the things that you sort of associate commonly with, like saying stories over and over again that you said before, forgetting words and getting lost more, but all these things, see a physician. If just there are people whose job it is to work you up, and people like Alex Hunter who can make a very good diagnosis on you and tell you what your risks are and give you your options. So I think that what we need is, so I was saying that there's this big problem. And one of my themes is that there's a solution. And we have to do that, go through that point to get to our solution. The thing that we have to go from problem to solution, the middle ground, there is no other way about it, is to get healthy people like you all into see Alex. Because clinical trials are the only way we're going to get this thing done. So every problem has a solution to some extent. That's the only solution that I know of, is to scientifically study it, just like you would study a cancer therapy or any other type of therapy for asthma or anything else. And so that's the culture shift that we need to do. So being a amateur physician of yourself and diagnosing yourself, it's not necessary. Go in, get it worked up, and do something about it. That's my basic over here and over there.
Yeah. Is there a point in time in the journey of Alzheimer's, whether that's early diagnosis, middle diagnosis, or end diagnosis, where that interruption or that clinical trial is imperative, where you get into a better option for cure, or not cure, but for delay?
Well, as of now, there's no cure. So I can't say that. I would say that the best time is before you're symptomatic.
Okay.
But the thing is, before you're symptomatic, there can be blood tests or imaging tests that confer somebody like Alex to know what your option is to prevent the thing in the first place. Once that a third of your brain is carted away, you're in trouble. And we have options to make things better, to mitigate risk, but not to really slow down the disease, unfortunately. To slow down the disease, you gotta affect people early. Yes, ma'am?
We're part of your program.
Excuse me?
We're part of your program. He's infused every 2 weeks.
Yay!
This is a couple of years now, we're into it. I'm not. I mean, I'm follow. It's so easy, and these people are so good to work with.
Okay, let me just say that I did not plant this individual. But thank you! Yes. No, I mean, I don't have a conflict of interest here. I do not make money or my career. I'm a totally separate issue. I'm talking about, the reason I'm here is for social change. This is the aspect of the world that needs to change, and it needs to get good people like y'all involved in the process of preventing or in testing the preventive possibilities. Yes, ma'am?
We did it because we're UK alums, we're Kentucky proud, and Sanders Brown is the gold standard of the world. And so we went in, and it's so pleasant to work with you.
Counted to say, can I get an amen? All right, let me get back on track before Ron starts wrapping me on my knuckles here. So, one of the things that I was saying is that it has an adverse impact on our culture, and one of the ways is financial. $355 billion per year. I had a wonderful neighbor for 15 years. She just moved last year. She was in her 80s and then her 90s. She was just a wonderful person, but she was starting to wobble. She didn't cost anybody anything. She got her milk, she got her Social Security check, she watched Fox News, and she's a wonderful lady. She was super classy. She would show up to her door with lipstick on. Like, wonderful, wonderful woman. To our society, she was nothing but a good thing. She was like, helps in our neighborhood. She was a wonderful person. But now she's in a nursing home, and it costs $100,000 a year that we're all paying for. And it's just, it's like in addition to all of the emotional stuff, all of the, the life, the sadness, it also is something that is not sustainable as the population ages. So the point is the symptom, we discussed this, of dementia versus the disease. So my analogy is that shortness of breath is a symptom. It can be caused by pneumonia, which is an infectious disease, or asthma, which is an autoimmune disease, which is your body having too much inflammation. If you treat it with one of those things, it can make the other one worse if you misdiagnose it. So it's the symptom is not so important. The disease is knowing the disease is important. And that's something where we have sort of come in our center, is highlighting the heterogeneity, the complexity of the diseases that drive dementia. And I'm not going to get into it all that much. Vascular disease is something important. It contributes to almost everybody after age 80. You can address it. You can take care of your blood pressure. You can take care of your blood sugar, and that will make a difference. The other ones, we don't have the ability to change them, and that's why we need clinical trials. So the memory problem, which is amnesia, which can culminate in dementia, can perhaps represent a manifestation of Alzheimer's disease or other problems. And that seems like a bummer. That seems like a bummer, but it seems also like maybe it's just academic, and you're just in your ivory tower enumerating different bad things that can happen to you, and that's not great. Well, the thing is, I analogize it to cancer. We used to, you said, oh, you have an x-ray that shows you have a lump on your breast or on your lung. Let's zap you with a poison and hope that the poison kills the cancer before it kills you. That was the state of cancer until about 30 years ago. Now, we know there's a thing on your x-ray. We have to biopsy it because we don't know what the heck it is. Because we know that there can be 40 different lung cancers, and they have different biochemical pathways. Each one of those pathways is a candidate for a specific drug that doesn't harm you, but harms the tumor. And so forth. There's been a great bending of the survival curve of cancer since the 1990s when they started to grapple with that complexity. We're doing the same thing with dementia, although it is kind of a bummer. You jump out of this burning window, you don't actually have Alzheimer's, but you go into another problem. So it's not without. But the point is, each one of these additional discovered conditions is an opportunity. It's an opportunity, and we have to take them one after another and peel them off. But with those opportunities comes the necessity that we desperately need. We desperately need patient-specific therapies, analogous again to cancer. Cancer is not a one-size-fits-all disease. Dementia is not a one-size-fits-all disease. So how do we get to a future? Now, this is something that Alex is a worldwide expert in. I'm not exactly, but I'll just tell you, it's clinical trials, and you're going to hear from one of the best. these new therapies are tested for risk. Now, you can get a drug or a placebo if you engage in a clinical trial. So you may not even be getting an active thing. You may be getting a sugar pill. You'll get great care and you'll get evaluated very thoroughly. And that's one of the things that's sort of interesting academically, is they find, even in something like cancer or dementia, where you'd think a placebo wouldn't matter at all. But people who are involved in clinical trials who are on a placebo, if you compare them to people that are not in clinical trials, they do way better. It's a very curious thing. That extra added attention, that extra whatever it is, I don't know what it is, but they do better. That's not a promise, that's just a scientific fact. So the key is you go into Ms. Hunter and you say hello to her, and you get your whatever test you're going to get. You get a bunch of neurocognitive tests, you get your blood tests, you get your spinal fluid tests, brain imaging perhaps, and then you say, hey, you have this, or you have that. Or they could be 6 or 7 things. But you then are told, what are your options? Well, for this, you have options 1, 2, and 3. For this, you have 4 and 5. So we're going to hear a lot more about that. But the point is, you get great care. You're contributing to a cure, whether you get the placebo or the drug, and even if the drug doesn't work, because obviously some drugs don't work. Some drugs don't work. That's why we're having the darn clinical trial in the first place. But you possibly get treated. That's one thing that I feel good about. Well, I'll just tell you sort of a history of different places. So there are different Alzheimer's disease research centers that are funded around the country. There are about 30-something of them. Harvard's got one, Stanford's got one. They're all super fancy places. They have research campuses that look like our downtown, and they're funded ridiculously. I came from one of those places, UPenn, an Ivy League place in Philly, huge campus, everything like that. But what they did with their Alzheimer's Center is that they followed people that had those early onset dementia that you asked about. They're genetically driven, they're very sexy, you get a very fast turnaround on your return, and you get some very neat things. What they've had here in the early 80s, when they were thinking of how they're going to design this research study, they didn't have that option because they don't have a catchment area like Baltimore or Boston or San Francisco. They don't have a catchment area of 5 million people, so the 1 in a million person that comes in this really interesting thing will get 5 of them. We had a very meager catchment area in terms of population. So what they did was, in a sense, quite boring. They followed normal people who are normal in a normal nursing home or in a normal home and just had them back in every year. Year after year following them. Many of those people never became demented. Many of those people were subtly demented, and you all know people in your lives that are there's a little bit of edge off, but they're not so impaired, and many of them became demented over time. So this is something that's been in effect for 30, 40 years, and it's following people. At this point, our research center has a magnificent reputation because we have the one thing that they don't have at Harvard and Stanford, normal people for a normal study to compare. And the emphasis on pharmacological advances in therapeutics. Ron, how am I doing for time? I'm over?
You're doing fine.
Okay. The emphasis on therapeutics has been in prevention. So all those Harvard people who are super duper demented and they're following them are useless. We can't prevent their dementia, we can't treat their dementia. But the consortia that are now trying to get drugs into people, they need the normal people that have been well worked up, well followed, well characterized. And so the focus is on Little Kentucky. And the answer to the trivia question of the place in America with the most people involved in clinical trials is none other than little old University of Kentucky. So that's not bragging on me, this is bragging on my colleagues who have been at this for a long time before I got here, and this is actually the absolute reason why I am here today. So, yes?
Would you like to talk about your new research center you all just opened up behind Old Turtle and all?
I will let Alex talk about that.
Okay.
Because she actually works there. I work in that the Sanders Brown Center up on Limestone, and I'll let her talk about it. But it is a tremendous advancement. Excuse me?
You didn't get to move to the new place?
No, ma'am. But I'm proud of it, and I'm glad finally that our patients are able to have a treatment option that's not shameful. It's not a shameful place. It's never been, swankiness has generally not been our calling card. I think it's fair to say. But functionality and effectiveness and contributions to the field, I think, has been extraordinary. And it was that way long before I got here. Any other questions? All right. Is that reasonable time? Pardon me? Is that reasonable time?
Pete, thank you very much for this presentation. You know, the purpose of this is education, and who better to talk about it than Dr. Nelson. When you talk about clinical trials, let me just tell you one thing. Carol had 2 trials. The first trial that she had, she did remarkably well. By the way, on these trials, when you go there, it's free. And when you go there, they make sure you stay healthy or find out what is wrong. The first test that Carol did, after about 3 weeks, she went in, and it's usually every other week you go in, check, see how you're doing, and they found that the test, which was being conducted among 250 people in the United States, Carol was having some intestinal problems. So they right away checked with everyone else and found 4 other people that had it. So they canceled the test. 6 months later, Carol qualified for another test, which she took, and it caused infusions at UK Hospital every other week for 2 years. That can get hard. The good news is it stabilized Carol. She actually didn't get any worse, but she didn't get any better. It just stabilized, and it was great because it was like, once you're used to the other modifications, Carol was Carol, you know, and from that point, after the 2 years, the test ended. And we were very pleased during those 2 years what was going on, and Dr. Chika tried to get it extended, and it's a test. It's 2 years, black and white, it's over with. Fast forward several years, about 2 years ago, we got a call from the manufacturer, and they wanted to have Dr. Chika tell us that serum that she was taking is now going into a manufacturing stage, because they found out that that test stabilized all the other people during that, and it actually gave Carol 2 or more years of extra life than she would have had. And although Carol was too far along to now get this serum, they offered it to her for the rest of her life free, and they thanked her for helping to discover something that would help other people, which is what Carol was all about. She said, "Will it help others?" And I said, "Yes, it will." And she said, "Sure, we'll do it." So from that standpoint, that's the importance of an Alex that we have. The clinical trials are very, very important because they learn from that. They learn the good, they learn the bad. That's why they do the test. But, you know, this has been going on since 1980s. The research goes back to Dr. Marksberry. You know, still don't have a solution. Like Pete said, you know, we have hope. We're doing all the work that we can, but we're still looking, what is the solution? And without further ado, I want to introduce to you Alex Hunter, who is the Clinical Trials Research Manager for Sanders Brown.
Ron and Dr. Nelson both spoke to their motivations, so I will do that for you also. My motivations are a little bit different than theirs. I know Dr. Nelson mentioned epidemiology, the study of diseases. I am a huge nerd at heart. I went to school for epidemiology. Diseases on a scientific level are fascinating. On a human level, they're real scary, and we don't like them. But, you know, looking at the books and stuff, it's very, very interesting to some people like me. So research was always going to be my path. I worked in research with sexual assault survivors. I worked in research with cardiology patients, whether they had a transplant or high blood pressure, a variety of things. And then I came to Sanders Brown. And because I wanted to do research, you know, how everybody's family is touched by dementia. I had a little bit of that too. Nothing quite as, you know, terrible as Ron's experience. They were very late and had other health issues going on at that time. But, so I came to Sanders Brown and I fell in love with our research participants. They are some of the most wonderful people I've ever met. They are so giving. They want to help, whether it's for them or for their kids or just anybody in the future. I have never met a group of people quite like our participants, so that's why I stayed. They're amazing, and I really love working with our participants. So like Ron said, I am Alex Hunter. I am one of the clinical trials research managers at Sanders Brown. That means a lot of different things depending on the day. Sometimes I might be filling and drawing blood. Sometimes I might be in the lab processing. I might be working on budgets. I might be supervising the other trials that are going on, making sure that all the participants are happy and well cared for. But my favorite days are when I actually get to be with the participants, like I said, because I love spending time with them. And I know you all know Ron, and some of you are involved in our research, and you just heard Dr. Nelson speak, so you might have a little bit of advantage with this little experiment I'd like to do, if you all don't mind. In research, it's real important that we get consent before we do anything. So is it okay if we do a little something?
Sure.
Okay. So when you hear Center on Aging or the Alzheimer's Disease Center, what do you think about? Do you think that that's maybe a place only for folks with very advanced dementia? And if you that came to your mind, you can raise your hand. It's only for folks that have a lot of dementia that's not me. No? Okay. Oh, Ron thought that? Okay. How about, did you think that this sounds like a place for folks with any amount of memory problems, large or small, but definitely memory problems? Yep, okay, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what it sounds like. And what about if you think this sounds like a place for caregivers or folks that love someone that has dementia? Yep, okay, got a few of those, all right. And then how about, please raise your hand if you think this sounds like a place for all older adults, regardless of their cognitive status or abilities. Okay, so yep, got a few, good job. So those of you that raised your hands to the last two questions, you were absolutely correct. And it's an unfortunate thing, but all of us at Sanders Brown really know that this is a common misconception that, people think that we are a place only for folks with advanced dementia or dementia. But what we want you all to know is that we are here for each and every one of you. And your friends, and your family, and your neighbors. We are working to try to be well known in the community and to be well known accurately in the community, that we are a place for each and every one of you and everybody you know. I know Dr. Nelson touched on the clinical trials, and the clinical trials are my whole job, but we have research studies for people with normal cognitive function that have no memory problems at all. And that's our longitudinal cohort for the folks that come in once a year and see us, have some memory tests, get their blood draw, see a clinician, and we say thanks, see you next year. We have research studies for people with normal cognition, but they might be at risk for developing memory problems in the future, like our AHEAD study.
We have research studies for people with mild memory problems, like our SMART-HS or ADVISE studies. We have research studies for people with advanced dementia who might also be agitated or have behavioral problems due to their cognitive decline, like Harmony at Home. We have research studies and workshops for caregivers. We know that that is one of the hardest jobs in the world, and we want to be there to support you all. We have research studies that involve investigational new medications. They might be pills, they might be infusions, they might be injections. We have research studies that involve management of medications that you're already taking. So maybe get you off a few pills, but keep everything, going as it should. We have research studies that involve non-pharmaceutical interventions, like modifying the home environment to make everything more conducive to happiness and harmony at home, like the study is called. We have research studies that are purely observational, no intervention at all. You just come and see us. We might do some memory testing, ask some questions, but that's all. And all of these studies have one very important thing in common. They get us closer to a cure every single day. And it's no easy feat. We don't have a cure, but we hope to in the future. And we will get there because of our valuable research participants that are so selfless and take the time out of their lives to help everyone else. And the biggest thing I want to express to you all, more than anything, and for you to take away, is that the Sanders Brown Center on Aging has something for every single person. We have something for each and every one of you, and we would love to see you all at our clinic, your Center on Aging. I have some flyers here in the back and information about some of our current studies. Once we're kind of wrapped up here, come over, talk to me, grab something with our phone number on it if you want to. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm here to help. And I know Dr. Nelson opened the floor for lots of questions. If you all have more questions, I'm happy to take them now. I know I didn't take up a lot of time speaking, so we can have a little time to chat. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
So if you call and if you want to be part of the study, how do you determine what study to be a part of and how to use it?
Absolutely. So if you just call us up and say, hey, I'd like to be involved in research, so what's the next step? We have a wonderful team of individuals that work for recruiting individuals into studies. So they will talk with you, get a little background on maybe some medical history, maybe some familial history, see even what you're interested in, and then we'll try to find a good place that we think you would fit in well and that you would like to participate in. Yes?
I have a question, because when I first called the Sanders Brown Center, I was told that you had to have a doctor's record of referral.
So we don't do anything really with like insurance where you would need a doctor's referral.
I'm not talking about insurance, I'm talking about how to get into
to
see somebody. Well, I wound up finally getting a doctor to refer me, but he referred us to Dr. King, who's in the same general area. But I'm wondering why was I not talked to by one of these groups?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very great question. Sometimes we get other doctors in the community calling Sanders Brown saying, I need my patient to see a neurologist. So they come to see either Sanders Brown, or where they really should be going is the Kentucky Neuroscience Institute. That is the neurology clinic at UK is what that is called. So some people get us confused that way, and those folks there are wonderful, and they might refer you on to clinical trials, but they are primarily just treatment. They are just neurologists, but that might be involved with us in clinical trials. So what might have happened was your doctor maybe called KNI, the Kentucky Neuroscience Institute, and they said, you need a referral to be here, but at Sanders Brown, you do not. So if you called this number and you had that information, I'm very sorry that was conveyed to you inaccurately. Any other questions? Okay. Yes.
Is there an age limit as to when you would want to start anyone in the study?
So it depends on the study. Some of our studies will allow folks in that are 50. Some of our studies are looking at an older population and they want people that are 75 or older. Our studies that involve caregivers, of course, they can be any age. But it really just depends on the individual study. They all have their different criteria. All right, thank you all.
Your question was a good question because I know that in just calling Sanders Brown, basically there's a general number, and I know from my experience that is screened to see exactly what it is. There's 75,000 people in the state of Kentucky with Alzheimer's. You know, that, and there is, and I can go back as Pete referenced to the olden days. For 8 years, we went to what I called the dump, and that was on Broadway. That was Sanders Brown, and basically it was between Lucky's Market in a strip center and a pizza joint. And you know, if you weren't feeling good, you know, they couldn't do anything in Sanders Brown, they'd send you next door to get a beer. But it is by calling to get the information, just calling the Sanders Brown number. Do you need a doctor's referral? Well, Carol's doctor said that, because I told the doctor, I said, you know, I'm a little worried about her forgetfulness. And the doctor, this was just the general physician, gave her a quick test and said, Ron, I think probably she should see a neurosurgeon. And of course, it's not only at Sanders Brown, but there are neurosurgeons all around, but they can screen out some. You don't have to go to them. You know, you can go directly to Sanders Brown or go to someone that you know and let them do further screening, because their testing can kind of sort through to see exactly what it is. I always blamed it on old age. Well, I'm getting so old I don't know what to blame it on anymore. What you see is what you get now, so you never know what's coming out of my mouth. So, but I can also testify to the fact that, as one lady said in the back, that I would guess that with everything that was done, because once we signed up to donate our brains, that's an annual thing. I just took my test again a week ago. And it seems so simple, but boy, they read me 14 names and 5 minutes later asked me to repeat it. Well, there were some words I repeated that weren't what I said. You know, and it's a strain on the brain, I'll tell you that. But it happens every year. They don't just do the test and that's it, and you don't see them again. Dr. Jaika made a call to Carol every year in the home that she was in. You know, so they don't just let you go. They followed up, and to keep her medically healthy as she went through that period were millions of dollars I know they spent on Carol, just keeping her healthy. And we didn't do it because it was free, but it was free. And she was the healthiest person with Alzheimer's that I know, so I can only testify to that. Yes, ma'am.
How long did Carol live after she found out she had this dementia?
10 years.
10 years.
November 11th, and then she passed in March of 2020, during the time of the pandemic, which was really hard because my family and I couldn't have closure until I could finally fly some of them in, and that was in August, so, yes.
How old was she when she first found out that she had it?
Old age. Oh, Carol, you forgot this. You know, it wasn't noticed. I went 3 years without acknowledging and finding out for sure about the Alzheimer's. You know, I was in denial. You know, I was making the excuses for her. And it was thanks to a good practitioner that we had, and concerns my son, Nick that was here, that he said, Dad, Mom's driving down the wrong way on a one-way street. said, well, there's a center line there and all that. You know, I made excuses for her, but he was absolutely right. But I still was in denial with that until finally, in talking with the doctor, she said, you need to see a neurosurgeon. And that was in 2011. I think that probably she had it even before we acknowledged it. It could have been a couple of years sooner because, you know, we always blame it on you getting old, right? You know, well, there was more to it than that, and it took me a while to acknowledge that. And it was my family that pushed me in really, and that and driving to Ashland, Kentucky when she was supposed to be home. Got a lot of cooperation from the police state trooper there. There's a state trooper in Ashland, Kentucky, God love him. But I told Carol afterwards, I said, Carol, that state trooper pulled your license. You can't drive anymore. And that's a godsend because she liked to drive everywhere. And that's how we got her to stop driving. And every once in a while, if we were going on a trip, she'd say, if you get tired, I'll drive. And she'd start laughing like she accepted that she had Alzheimer's. And come to find out, her beautician, when I was down there one time, and come to find out, Alex told me, she said, you know, Ron, a couple months ago, Carol said, probably my husband's going to have to start bringing me because I got lost a couple times. He doesn't know that. And she was telling others before I even found out about it.
Can I just make a quick point? Real quick. So what he just said about the 10-year interval between when she got diagnosed and when she passed, that's a very frequent, that's about average, maybe 9 years or something like that. But it's increasingly clear that the disease itself is going on for 20, 30, maybe even 40 years before somebody passes. And that interval, that longer expanded interval for when the thing is going on, also provides a target for when you can prevent it from keeping on going. So that means that there's a really strong need to extend before you get that diagnosis to get your sort of molecular diagnosis, sort of like how you get your colon cancer checked before you get to fulminant colon cancer that's going through your whole body. You get a colonoscopy, which is pretty much the ultimate invasive thing you could possibly do. But we do it, and it has caused so many fewer colon cancer deaths. We need an analogous approach to preventing this 30-year onslaught that's going on in people's brains 20 years before they even get the diagnosis. So that the natural history is 20, 30 years, even though it was only a 10-year interval in this case between the time that she learned that she had a seriously large problem and she passed. So that's an important point in terms of the time that we can get in there and prevent it from happening in the end.
But for Alzheimer's, you don't have that colonoscopy.
No, but we do actually have molecular tests that are very analogous. We don't actually use a
So is that part of your trials you're doing? Are you studying the children of these patients you have with Alzheimer's so that you can see how they do because they have a greater risk?
No, we can do direct molecular tests in the blood and the cerebral spinal fluid and by imaging of their brain. Those will give us, irrespective of their genetic risk, but we also can evaluate their genetic risk as well.
Yes.
Was your wife diagnosed first diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment? Was that one of her starting points? Was mild cognitive impairment or is Alzheimer's?
Yeah, you go mild, moderate, and then you get further along, and then there's not much help you can do other than monitoring it and getting all the facts and figures for the further study for research. But when you have a mild case, at least in my case, I can only talk about Carol, it was hard to determine she had a mild case of Alzheimer's. That was the hard part. It was hard to tell. I think you bowled with her, didn't you?
No, I didn't.
No. Anyway, the lady that was close to her that lived in Georgetown that Carol was supposed to be visiting that got lost that time, she noticed it, and you have to be real close to her to see the memory. It was the first thing for her. And the violence and change in personality came after 5 years. So that was, that initial part of my own case was hard to determine because for the most part she was normal.
It's sort of interesting research-wise. It turns out that people that do really well on intelligence tests, they are later diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. They have ways of compensating in their mind that can be looked at also with imaging techniques. But what's interesting about people with very high intelligence, they can put it off for longer, but then when it goes down and the ultimate reckoning happens, it's more swift and severe. So it's an interesting phenomenon.
I don't know who can answer this, but I have a family member who is an early onset, evidently, and not 20 years ago, probably 15 years ago, she lost her sense of smell and taste. And I don't know if that's a precursor to this, or if that's something that you studied, or...
That could be a feature of a disease called dementia with Lewy bodies, and it can be, that's a sort of a separate neurodegenerative condition that frequently presents with so-called anosmia, where they can't smell or taste.
I have another question I'd like to ask for myself. I'll be upstairs in my kitchen, and then I'll go down to the basement. That's where we keep our canned food and all that. Well, I go downstairs, and when I get downstairs, then I'll turn around and I'll say, well, what did you come down here for? And all of a sudden, it'll put a can. It's just like a light bulb going on and off, on and off. So is that dementia? Yes.
Welcome to my world. And that's not unusual. And I don't know if it's Alzheimer's or what, but I'll go walk in another room and forget what I came in there for. And to me, it may be a sign. I guess that I get an annual physical, and that may be something to ask the doctor. The doctor for Carol and many doctors, there's a quick test. You know, they give them 3 numbers and then repeat them or something along that line. And that can kind of tell a little bit that maybe we ought to look into this a little bit further. Do you have dementia? I don't know. You asked a pretty intelligent question. You're open with it. So, you know, I think we all may, to some degree, have dementia. You know, I hate to say that, but...
Dementia is, by definition, impairment of activities of daily living. So you do not have dementia. Joe Biden, as wobbly as he is, he does not have dementia. Dementia means you have impairments of your ability to take care of daily living jobs and tasks. So, but the symptoms that you mentioned can be absolutely innocuous or can be rather grave, you know, and scary. Just go to a doctor and they will be able to help inform you of what your risks are in terms of your specific molecular testing outcomes and whether or not there are options for you. There's no reason to sit and having us wonder about what our risks are, because now there are increasingly sophisticated, effective tests that are not only there to tell you that, oh, you're messed over, but that you have options to try to address those things. And they're different. They can triage you into different categories that can be guided to different risk areas. For example, there's a disease that is called late, that we here at the University of Kentucky have been at the very forefront of. It affects 1/3 of people over age 85, and it strongly contributes to the dementia clinical syndrome. We have the one and only clinical trial for late in the whole world here at the University of Kentucky. It's something that you need to have a blood test for to see what your risk is. Most people won't, you know, be a candidate for it, but many will. And so why not give it a shot, see what you get, and then you have choices. The point is choices. One of the things that has really been terrible about my field is that the crusty old farts that are in the regulatory of NIH have heroically thrown themselves between patients and options. They have heroically decided that it's up to them, that you can't accept this risk because they are going to take that risk off the table for you. And The reason for that is that they've decided that dementia is in a different category from cancer. Cancer is terrible. Cancer is terrible. It'll kill you. So they'll do anything to cure your cancer or else kill you with the cure. And they're fine with that because cancer is so horrible. Well, guess what? Ron can tell you, and I promise you I can tell you from my life, that dementia is horrible too. Dementia can be horrible too. Not everybody wants to take a cure. It's not, the point is not to take options away from people and to say, you have to do this, you have to do that. My point is, give people options. They're adults and their caregivers are adults. Let them make decisions and let them know what the risks are. If you want to do that, those options are now open for you. If you don't want to accept any risk, and if you don't want to know anything, fine. And most of the people like that are not in this room. But I would say that if you do want to, we're at a point where we are giving a lot of people at least the hope of participating in getting towards those cures. More than ever before. It's not like it was 10 or 20 years ago. Now there is real options for molecular therapies that are completely different from ever before. And so that's blah, blah, blah.
So we just call that number then if we want to,
I believe that's the one-stop shopping for it. The gentleman was talking about being put into a different care. Dr. Jaika, who's our chief clinician, he has like an 8 months out difficulty for finding somebody for a normal neurological visit. But for getting somebody to work you up and sort of triage you and to understand what your risks are is sort of a different parallel path, and that I think goes through that number.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So what's the conversation of someone like us has with someone on the onset of Alzheimer's to come to you guys to sit down and take these tests?
So, wait, you sort of twisted that at the very end, because the conversation of somebody who gets a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, that's a very difficult conversation. That's a very difficult conversation for all parties. It's a hard thing to get. It's a hard thing for a clinician to come to the table with that, and it's a hard thing for a patient and the caregiver. Ron was he didn't even want to even trust it or think about it. He was in denial for 3 years. It's a hard thing to get through. You can't have a car keys when you love driving. That's a hard thing to hear. It can be devastating. So that is something that's outside my bailiwick exactly. But it takes a lot of sensitivity, and it takes people that really know what the heck they're doing, of whom I am not one. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question for Alex. Is there any value in having siblings in the testing cycles?
Absolutely. There's a lot of value in that, especially if you have a parent or one of the siblings already has the memory problems, because of that genetic component that Dr. Nelson talked about that can be so strong. Now, something like vascular dementia that folks get from oftentimes having high blood pressure, while the vascular dementia itself isn't hereditary, the hypertension could be. So that's still, a way to go with that. The same with Alzheimer's, like he talks about that ApoE gene that is, increases your risk a lot, and that travels in families because it is a gene. So we do have, I can think of a few different groups of families that have participated that maybe have like 3 or 4 siblings in the same study, because they all have that increased risk of developing dementia, and they saw one of their parents, die from this, and they don't want to be that person, or they want to maybe help their kids from, being that person. But absolutely, we would love to have siblings. Very interesting phenomenon.
Way in the back.
You're studying something really interesting too, the amyloid plaque. And you can have plaque, but not Alzheimer's?
So I didn't really get into this in my talk exactly, but the features that you look at in the brain that are specific for the actual diagnosis of Alzheimer's are called plaques and tangles. And they work through a fairly complicated mechanism where something leads to the plaques. The plaques are on the outside of the cells. Then tangles happen inside the cells, so they're tangling up the cells. And then it's the amount of tangles that correlates with cognitive impairment that manifests with the dementia syndrome. So you can have plaques and not have dementia. It's the tangles that are associated with the dementia.
And I think also what you're getting at is where Dr. Nelson talked about that there are these biological markers that we can see 20, 30 years before you actually have the memory problem. And one of those things we can see are those amyloid plaques on a PET scan. So you might have, your memory is completely fine right now, but we can see the problem developing years before there is actually a problem. So we have one study in particular that enrolls these folks, and we try to get rid of those plaques before they cause a memory problem.
So you have a treatment for it?
Yes.
It's not approved yet.
You did not mention PSP as a category, and do you see much of that? And is there a genetic component of that, and much for testing of that?
So it was asked, the progressive supranuclear palsy is one of the number of conditions that can culminate in dementia. It is an unusual contributor to the dementia syndrome. It also has motor syndrome and other symptoms. Actually, it's less rare than people think, PSP. In terms of the rare, it's sort of a common rare, if that makes any sense. It's a common rare disease. There are rare diseases that are even more infrequent. But the point is, a lot of things can happen that are bad, but there's a sort of a cliche in this clinical world that if you hear hoofbeats, first think of horses, not zebras, and so it would be a frequent zebra.
Yes, way in the back.
I was wondering, what is the mechanism by which the serum that Carol received was able to cause the hiatus from the worsening of the symptoms? What did it do on the cellular
The
level?
details of her treatment are unclear to me. It's not my business. What happens is that you can use your immune system to clear the bad stuff before it hurts you. So you have an antibody in your bloodstream that goes up and takes out the stuff that's in the plaques before it causes the tangles.
And that was what the serum did?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh.
Yes.
What medications, if any, are you guys studying for blood flow to the brain?
So a number of different things increase the blood flow to the brain, and that's a natural target. One of the things that you got to be careful about is the blood pressure is an increase in blood flow to the brain. So you don't want to have increased blood pressure, but you want to have increased blood flow. The medicine that's used in the clinical trial against late is actually a medicine that increases blood flow to the brain, and it's hypothesized to decrease the pathology of late. And so there are a number of different medicines that increase blood flow.
Could you spell what you were saying? I'm not catching that disease.
L-A-T-E, late. It's a word salad. It's sort of an acronym. Limbic predominant, age-related, TDP-43 encephalopathy.
Just Google it. Yeah.
That was when I duck, and I hope that most of you guys finished your food. So.
I do have a flyer about that study in the back specifically too.
Question way in the back.
So I had a question about the ApoE gene. So you said it increases your chance or likelihood of having Alzheimer's, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I work in a laboratory with zebrafish, and we use this technology called CRISPR-Cas9. You've heard of that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so can we use CRISPR-Cas9 to knock out APO gene or ApoE gene at an early developmental stage?
So the question is, why not destroy ApoE? The point is that ApoE does very important things for cholesterol processing in your body and in your brain. So if you get rid of ApoE, you destroy a really important function of processing your molecules to neurons in your brain. So it would be probably a lethal problem if you did that.
Okay.
It's not that simple, but it's probably barking up the right tree there.
Yes.
I asked Dr. Jika this many times every time I go to hear him speak. I know I'm really. But traumatic brain injury, are they showing that that's a sign that you could have Alzheimer's after you receive a traumatic brain injury?
So anything that hurts your brain increase the likelihood and speed with which you will arrive at Alzheimer's disease with a given amount of pathology. In addition to that, for weird reasons that people don't understand, trauma to the brain produces a destructive force of problem in some people, but not everybody's brain, that then goes on the download for a while. So somebody that's a professional football player will play between the ages of 12 and 30 or something. Then they'll be fine for 10, 15, 20 years. Then those people will develop a pathology in the brain that has a lot of overlap with Alzheimer's disease. It's not the same thing, but it's remarkably similar. So these influences that you incur over the course of your life, including brain trauma, can contribute not only in a general sense to the decreased resilience of your brain, but in a specific way to some of the same pathways that can culminate in the dementia syndrome following Alzheimer's and other dementias. That's sort of a long...
Well,
that's
that
sort of a
explains about the
namby-pamby.
football players, because you hear about that more recently, and so, you know, and that's the same thing Dr. Jika said, well, we're not really sure, but it can contribute.
All right, well, I echo his namby-pamby response.
Okay, the main purpose of these meetings is, as I have caregiver meetings, which we have the second Monday of every month here at the Cathedral in the conference room at the O'Neill Administration Building. And some of the things that I'm finding, because they're discussion groups, I can only speak from my experience, but everyone else that comes to these meetings speak from their experience, and it's because of the group meetings that we help each other. And one of the things I found in talking with the people is that if you're like me, I committed to take care of Carol, and I would do that the rest of my life. But it got to a point where I couldn't take care of her anymore. And a lot of people, including myself, were not necessarily prepared what to do in taking the next step. You know, how do you plan for that? Can I afford that? How does Medicare, Medicaid, how does all of that? What is out there for us? And what I'm finding is there is a crisis line that you get up to that point and then you got to react and do something, and you haven't really given it a lot of thought. Our next speaker is Susan Neville. I got to know Susan a little bit from a prior meeting and then things that come up that I refer to her, but she's the owner of Silver Lexington and is an expert in senior living options and caregiving plans. And this is someone that I found that in getting to the point of crisis, that's where Susan, with her experience and knowledge, has been a big help. And with that, Susan.
Hello. I'm going to give everybody's brains a little bit of a break because what I'm going to share is pretty general knowledge and information. It's such an honor to be here and to be speaking with these experts at Sanders Brown, and it's such a blessing that we have them right here in our community. I want to say thank you to Katie because her and the parish have been so supportive in hosting these educational events on aging, and it's so important. And so I'm so thankful that this is, I don't know, maybe our fourth or fifth program. So I started Silver Lexington 6 years ago. I have a business partner, Amber Lakin, who's between the two of us, we have about 20 years collectively in experience with serving seniors. During that time, we've worked in all different levels of care and all different areas of aging. And during those times that we saw a need that families have when it comes to understanding their options, knowing their resources, and the importance of planning ahead. we will help you. When you have that information and knowledge, you have a better chance of having a better outcome for the person that you're caring for. I think you said this earlier. There's not a textbook answer for how all of this works. There isn't a manual for how you navigate this diagnosis with your loved one. Because of that, this is general information, because really the approach that you have to take is individual to your situation. And it's so important to understand the knowledge and information that pertains to your situation. That's one thing that Amber and I help you do. We also recommend, too, connecting with local experts versus just be careful when you get on the internet and just start Googling information. We think it's important to connect with people that are locally here, that know the communities, know some of the resources that are available. It's never too soon to start planning. One of my motivations is to help. That's an introduction. But that's one of I have found over the years that is one of my motivations. I love to serve seniors. I love to share the knowledge that I have from experience with helping seniors for the last 12 years. So helping you get a plan together, whether you ever need to use your plan or not, is so important to have. Doing that, it alleviates the opportunity that may come up that you're trying to figure everything out in crisis mode. So I always, when we meet with families, we encourage you, let's talk about all of your options, and I'll just cover a couple of ones that come up. Housing options, home care options, and caregiver support. The bottom line is a lot hinges on budget, and that's just something that has to be discussed. It's sometimes uncomfortable to talk about with your loved ones, but you really have to have an idea, because that will depend on what direction that you go when you're caring for someone. It might involve looking into a memory care community. It might be having caregivers come into the home. So just for an example, if you were to have non-medical home care come into your home and give support, the average price for that is $22 to $27 an hour. Sometimes there's a 3 or 4 hour minimum. But that's things that's important for you all to know as you're caring for your loved one at home, to know that, do I need that to have that support to come in? Can I financially afford it? A memory care community in our area ranges from $5,000 to $7,500 a month. It's very expensive. So for those who, there's two types of people. There's the people that have financially prepared for things like this, and there are people who are caught off guard, and a lot is based on their income. So if you have a limited income, it's even more important that you start planning ahead, because there are programs out there, there's waiver programs, but sometimes there's a lengthy wait list. Sometimes it takes some time to get enrolled into these programs. So if you start planning well in advance, my thought is then when you get to that point, maybe your name's up on the list and you can take advantage of it. It all goes back to it's never too soon to start planning. So I'll touch on memory care communities. If you go that route, if that's where you land, there's a lot. Our city has a lot of really nice memory care communities. We feel it's very important for you to understand the differences in those communities. Some are larger, some are smaller, some have shorter hallways, some have different programming. Let's see here. And also, too, there's different licensing for both. There's assisted living memory care and there's personal care memory care. And sometimes when you're looking at that process, there are certain things that one community can do that another community can't, like crush medications. That's all information that you all need to know so that you can make the best decision for your loved one. Timing is important. The approach that you take when you're talking to your loved one is important. There's such a stigma with nursing homes, but I feel like with what I do and what I've been doing, that if you can plan and inform yourself, that maybe you can have a better chance of prolonging that option of having to go to skilled nursing. Memory care communities are unique in that their training, their staff training is, they've all been trained to take care of those with dementia. They have everything that they do during the day is geared towards those living with dementia, so they'll, the difference between just a different regular assisted living versus a memory care assisted living. In a regular assisted living, they may start their activities later in the day and they go for a longer amount of time. Well, in a memory care setting, they will start their activities later and have shorter amount of times, and they'll go through later in the evening. So there's just a difference, and knowing what those differences are will help you with making your decisions. Home care can be tricky. A lot of the managed care will still fall on the family. So I think if you know that going into it, you'll be better prepared. The good thing about home care is if you don't have the budget for a memory care community, that you can use some of those funds that are available to have someone come in your home and offer support, especially if you're a caregiver, and give you a break, because you, as a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself so that you can be a better caregiver for your loved one. Let's see here. So I'll just sort of wrap up with a couple of things takeaways that I think would be good if you all, as you leave. Thinking about finances is important. A lot of families that I work with carry a lot of guilt for, I promised I would never put my mom in a home. And so I spend a lot of time working with families trying to help them try to not feel guilty and to remember that their loved one may or may not be even able to cognitively process what's going on. So you have to remember that you are making decisions and thinking about your loved one's best interest, their safety, and making sure that their needs are met. So that's something else too, that the guilt is going to be there, but you have to keep your thought process that it's not necessarily a terrible thing. I had a lady recently that said, I don't want to put my sister, I promised her I would not put her in a home. And I said, I don't blame you. I wouldn't want to go to a stinky nursing home either, because they're out there. But there are communities that they're like apartments, and they do restaurant-style dining, and it can be a very positive environment. Let's see here. So I have information at the back with my number, some information about my business and how we can help you. It doesn't cost you all anything to use our services. I always say store our number, put it in your favorites. It's a journey. There's going to be multiple phone calls. I feel like Amber and I and Candy and some of the people who work in the community serving seniors, we get the information because we go to meetings, we're on boards, we're on advisory councils, but how do we get this information out to you guys. So if you need a resource, whether it's placement related or not, feel free to give me a call, because if I don't know the right answer, I feel pretty well connected that I could find the answer for you.
Can you give us your number?
Yeah. It's 859 519 8591. And I do want to share a couple of things with you. I have had the privilege of working on Dementia Friendly Lexington's advisory council for the last couple of years. And Candy's, she's on the advisory council as well. She's also my partner in crime. We also are part of the Aging Consortium. So we do that together. It's monthly meetings that we get together with our professional peers to discuss all of this information and plan events, see where there's needs, and help create events to help support those. But Dementia Friendly Lexington is very, very, very special. Virginia Bell, this has been a lifelong dream of hers. And to be a part of making her dream come true still gives me chills. She participates in all the meetings. She's going to be 100 on June 30th. And so the mayor is declaring Lexington dementia friendly on June 30th in honor of her 100th birthday. So her legacy will continue to live on. And the most amazing thing is some of those early meetings way in early 2019, she'd say, you all need to hurry up. I'm not going to live forever. Let's keep this going. And we had the pandemic, but everybody worked to get to where we are today. So just a brief little description on that. The goal of Dementia Friendly Lexington is to create a community where those living with dementia and their care partners can be supported, understood, and empowered. And so we are starting to train businesses. We've created development. We actually have the training through UK, CE Central. But we're going to have hairdressers, pharmacies. There was a Ramsey's restaurant night that they will go through. They have to commit to do a certain checklist of items. They have to commit to go through training. So many people on their staff have to be trained as well. When they complete all of those tasks, they're going to have a window clean that they're going to place in their place of business, so that when you're out in the community, or you can go to the Dementia Friendly website, you will be able to see, okay, this bank has been trained how to care for those with dementia, that they support this mission to support understanding, empowering, and understood. So I hope that you all will start seeing these all over town. There's bumpers, car stickers for your window. There's a bunch back there. I would love to start seeing these on the back of people's cars, just letting them know that we support dementia and we want to have a dementia-friendly community. Yep. So take those. There's also some of these. There's someone on our advisory council, David Nisbet, if any of you all know him. He used this card when caring for his dad, and it says, please be patient. The person with me has dementia or Alzheimer's. So that if you go out to a restaurant and you can just show the waiter so that they know that there's something going on, and then that will help them understand your situation and to be patient with the one that you're with. And he said every time that he's used this, and his dad would order a Jack and Coke, that he would look at the waiter and wink and say, bring him an iced tea, that kind of thing. So, but these are handy, and there's a bunch of them back there as well. There's also go ahead.
I just wanted to give another example of the need for these little cards. When my mother or I would take my father shopping in the grocery store, he would start putting the candy at the checkout counter into his pocket.
Yeah.
He'd come home with pocketfuls. So when we saw him doing that, we sort of said, we'll pay for that,
Right.
with the card.
Yeah. Well, you don't know with what's going on. I mean, there's, like I said earlier, there's not a manual for how you go through life, with the diagnosis or caring for someone, so you need to be prepared. At least that one little thing will help. So there are some tables in the back before we leave. There's a caring place that is a great organization that they have volunteers. They're always needing volunteers, or if you know someone that could use a phone buddy. So they have a group of volunteers that will make regular phone calls to the same senior at home. It's a special, so that's a caring place. If you want to grab some information. We have the Elder Abuse Prevention Council. June is Elder Abuse Prevention Awareness Month. And on Wednesday in Frankfurt, there's a big event. So there's lots of information back there that it's good to stay informed on. And there's dementia-friendly stuff, Sanders Brown, and then also Silver Lexington's information. So, like I said, placement is my area of expertise. However, informing families so that you can have that knowledge and information to make the best decision for your loved one, that's what I really want to help you get. And so, does anyone have any questions? Yep.
You had mentioned in-home caregivers, price range and all
Yep.
that. Would that include people that are specifically trained, or is it just?
There are some agencies that do special training with dementia, and I didn't mention that there are private duty caregiver options, but really it's word of mouth is how you find those versus the agency, and I think there's pros and cons to using both routes, but I think if you're really trying to make a decision on what do, you have to know what the home care option looks like, you have to know what the community option looks like, what programs are available so that you know what to do for your loved one.
You also mentioned
Yep.
Is there one agency for all those levels, or?
Well, the non-medical home care are all the same. It's the communities that are different because some of them will have an assisted living license and some will have a personal care. Yep.
I wanted to tell you that I found best friend from the Alzheimer's Association. Her mom had Alzheimer's, and best friends with Virginia Bell. And then after mom went there every week, she goes, "Well, why are we going here?"
Yeah.
And then even after mom passed away, I volunteered with best friends for a year.
Yeah.
And of course, I ended up with Alzheimer's, and I'm like, okay, I guess I should have kept along with it.
Well, yeah. Virginia Bell, she founded the Best Friends approach to dementia, and she's a world-renowned speaker, and she's a blessing to have here in our community as well. Thank you all very much.
Pete, Susan, Alex, thank you very much for helping us. Remember, this meeting is to encourage that the caregivers take care of themselves, because without you, nobody can be cared for. So just remember that. Again, our meetings are at second Monday of every month in the O'Neill Center. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. And one last thing, Katie Shepard.
Yeah.
My thanks to Katie. She has been the go-to, putting everything together. Unfortunately, we're leaving. She's going to a further position. Hopefully it's closer to heaven, and we wish her the best. Thank you.